When you think of nice and expensive food, what comes to mind? Steak? Sushi, maybe? Of all the meals out there, did you think about sandwiches? I've had some pretty amazing sandwiches, but they were all below $20, and I'm pretty sure none of them were public companies. But today, we're going to talk about a local deli somehow valued at over $100 million. In the small town of Paulsboro, New Jersey, with less than 7,000 people, there's just one high school. And the principal of Paulsboro High School is Paul Marina, as well as their head wrestling coach. As the head wrestling coach in Paulsboro for almost 30 years, he led his team to 25 state championships. So on top of his already busy job, Paul Marina decided to open up a deli right across from the high school, calling it Your Hometown Deli. I'm guessing he wanted a side gig which he could attract his wrestlers as the main customers. But shortly after opening the deli, one of his former wrestlers, James Patton, approached him and pitched an idea to turn the deli into a publicly traded company. Now, at this point, James was working as a financial analyst for a company called Tryon Capital. But here's the crazy bit, which Paul didn't know at the time. James had already been barred by regulators. He'd been disciplined multiple times for allegedly manipulating stock prices and other shady stuff. So, in hindsight, he didn't approach his former coach with good intentions. And that's pretty much what happened here. James Patton, along with his partners, spent 8 years scheming to inflate the stock price of the deli's umbrella company and another entity. They wanted to create a false impression of demand for the shares and make these companies look like good candidates for reverse mergers with privately owned companies. Their strategy involved coordinated stock trading between a small number of accounts held by family, friends, and associates. These accounts were name only, according to court documents. James has already gone through a court hearing, and I'll get into what happened there later in the video. Your Hometown Deli got taken over as a wholly owned subsidiary of Hometown International Incorporated in mid-2014. That means Hometown International was in charge of everything the deli did. By mid-2015, Hometown International went public, and the only thing it had going for it was this one little deli. Paul Marina, the wrestling coach who started the deli, was made president, CEO, CFO, and treasurer of Hometown International. But the thing is, James Patton called the shots behind the scenes, making Paul Marina just a figurehead aside from running the day-to-day operations of the deli. The deli had its best year in 2016, bringing in a whopping $76,000 in revenue. That's revenue, not profit. Then COVID-19 hits, and the revenue plunges to $14,000. Hometown never made a dime. In fact, they lost over $600,000 in 2020. Why? Being public ain't cheap. Compliance fees, audits, this stuff adds up, especially when your revenue's barely hitting $76,000 on a good year. To give you some more context, the average audit fee for smaller companies can be around hundreds of thousands of dollars per year. So, April 15th, 2021 rolls around. Instead of everyone being distracted by tax day, the media goes crazy over, guess who? Hometown Deli. Why? Because on that day, hedge fund billionaire David Einhorn drops a bomb in his newsletter calling out Hometown's suspicious situation. Here's what he said. Someone pointed us to Hometown International, which owns a single deli in rural New Jersey. The deli had $21,772 in sales in 2019 and only $13,976 in 2020. Hometown International reached a market cap of $113 million on February 8, 2021. The pastrami must be amazing. Yet the regulators who are supposed to be protecting investors appear to be neither present nor curious. So you'd think that with all the media attention Einhorn brought to Hometown, the stock price would tank, right? Everything would go back to normal? Wrong. Instead, folks started buying like crazy. The average daily trading before his letter was about 300 shares, but the day after the newsletter dropped, over 42,000 shares were traded. Instead of bursting the bubble, Einhorn's spotlight made the stock purchases go wild. So people were scratching their heads about why the stock blew up, but remember, this was right after the whole GameStop stock saga. As weird as it sounds, a lot of people thought it'd be cool and funny to buy a few shares in a deli. Despite the huge uptick in trading volume, the price of the shares actually went down a bit. You'd think more buying would push the price up, right? But no, the stock price dipped about 4% to $13 after a few days of increased trading. Yet, Hometown was still a $100 million company. With all this happening, everyone wanted to know what the hell was going on with this company. Here are a few things you need to know. 1. Hometown stock is an over-the-counter or OTC stock. This means it's publicly traded but not listed on an exchange like the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ. It's more like private listings and private buying. 2. The vast majority of Hometown International stock was owned by a small group of people. And 3. Market cap is basically the total value of a company's shares of stock. It's calculated by taking the current stock price, multiplying it by the total number of shares the company has. So if a company has 1 million shares and each share was worth $10, the market cap would be $10 million. When you put all that together, you can see that there's a pretty big risk of market manipulation with these OTC stocks. I'll try to explain how market capitalization can be manipulated some more. Let's just say there are a couple companies set up, but let's say the same person runs both. It's pretty easy to do. If both entities own shares in the same stock, they can sell the stock back and forth to each other for whatever price they want. If that's the last price given for a share, then that becomes the new market capitalization. If you sell one share from one of your companies to the other for twice what it was last sold for, then boom, the market cap doubles. People usually do this more sneakily, maybe building up slowly rather than suddenly selling one share for $1 million and claiming it's a billion-dollar company. Bottom line, that's what was happening with Hometown. This kind of market manipulation is totally illegal. Usually it's part of a pump and dump scheme where you pump up the price, hype up the stock, and then sell it off to excited investors, making a ton of money before the stock crashes. And the potential of the Hometown stock skyrocketing was really interesting since there was already over 900% increase in share price. However, with Hometown, there was all the pumping but none of the dumping. And one of the weirdest things about this case is that there was no attempt to publicize the stock, its price, or its growth. They just quietly kept inflating the value without trying to get people to buy in. Another theory people had about Hometown was that its entire reason for existing was to become a vehicle for a reverse merger. Here's how that works. There is a public company that already has its shares traded on the stock market, but it's just a shell company, meaning it doesn't do much business. Another company that wants to go public but wants to avoid the long, complicated process sees the shell company as an opportunity. So, the second company acquires shares of the shell company, and then that shell company buys the company that wants to be public. And there you go. The non-public company is suddenly public. It turns out there were 3 key players in this whole scheme of pumping stocks and reverse mergers. First, there's James Patton, the former Paulsboro High School wrestler. The second guy is Peter Coker Sr., and the third is Peter Coker Jr. All 3 were associated through James Patton's employer, Tryon Capital. These 3 guys, Patton, Coker Sr., and Coker Jr., allegedly transferred millions of Hometown International shares to proxy companies. These were just companies set up to play around in the stock market. They did this to hide their control over the shares and pump up the stock value. But they didn't stop there. They also allegedly transferred shares to family, friends, and associates. After doing that, they got control over those people's trading accounts by getting the login info. So they still basically controlled all these shares, but it looked like they didn't. Then they started doing wash sales and pumping up the stock price. According to court documents, Patton and the Cokers also set up so Hometown would pay consulting fees to Tryon Capital and another company every month. So on April 1st, 2022, Hometown International announced a reverse merger with a startup called McAmer Holdings Incorporated. This company had 0 revenue, which is even less than what the deli made. McAmer Holdings was allegedly led by the Cokers. Then, Hometown International paid McAmer Holdings over $500,000 in consulting fees, which ended up in the pockets of Patton and Cokers. besides that, no one really made much money from this deal. If you think about it, $500,000 split over 7 years and divided by 3 people is about $23,000 per year? Not exactly a fortune. Regardless, Patton and the Cokers were charged with securities fraud, conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and securities manipulation. The SEC also filed civil charges against them. Patton pleaded guilty while his partners have pleaded not guilty since this video. The deli closed its doors by mid-2022, and Paul Marino, well, he dodged a legal bullet. So, there you have it, a deli's wild ride from sandwiches to stock scams. This scheme was a failed one, thankfully. Despite creating a facade of high demand and inflated stock prices, they didn't make significant money. Instead, their actions drew attention from regulators and led to serious legal consequences. Well, lesson learned. If a pastrami sandwich sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, hit that subscribe button. Your support helps us create more great content and keep our channel growing. See you next time.